The 1979 to 1985 Eldorado undeniably represents one of Cadillac's most successful products in its history. It was during this time period that the front-wheel drive Eldorado actually had its best sales year in 1984, selling almost 78,000 units. Eldorado production had continued to increase throughout the years, but it really wasn't until the 79 to 85 Eldorado that the Eldorado became a very popular choice for many consumers who were looking for a high-end personal luxury coupe. When it arrived on the scene, the 79 Eldorado represented a much smaller vehicle than the vehicle it replaced. The wheelbase had been cut from 126.3 inches to 114 inches, and the overall length was dropped from 224 inches to 204 inches. As a result, the curb weight of the Eldorado dropped from 4,906 pounds down to 3,792 pounds. Despite shrinking in overall length, the car was actually quite roomy inside and in many dimensions was just as roomy or roomier than the vehicle that it replaced. And though it did lose quite a bit in size, it still had a certain Cadillac-y presence to it. Consumers responded highly favorably to this 1979 Eldorado, snapping them up in quantities that had not yet been seen before. For the 1979 model year, sales increased to 67,436 from the 1978 model year's 46,816. And throughout its model run, the production numbers for the Eldorado would actually get stronger through the 1985 model year. The team responsible for designing this home run was led by none other than Cadillac chief designer Wayne Kady. Wayne had been chief of Cadillac's Advanced Studio and worked on the 1971 Eldorado before departing to Buick and returning as the chief of Cadillac's Production Exterior Studio, where he worked on the 1977 downsized cars and the 1979 Eldorado before going on and working on subsequent vehicles in later years. We're thrilled to have Wayne back on the program to talk about the 1979 to 85 Eldorado's development and share some of his original artwork with us. Let's listen in as Wayne tells the story of how the 1979 Eldorado was designed. Well, welcome back to Rare Classic Cars. We're here again with Wayne Kady. I guess Mr. Cadillac a little bit, Wayne, right? So
I've got a few years behind me.
Got a few years. Wayne, for those who haven't watched the previous interviews with Wayne, he worked on the 67 Eldorado, among other things, the 67 Eldorado, the 71 Eldorado, then went to Buick Studio for a little bit, worked on the 75 redo of the full-size cars.
Yes.
As well as the Regal Coupe, where
76 Regal Coupe.
Where you stole the taillights off of the Eldorado.
I absolutely did, and that was George Elgis that asked me to put those on the Buick. He was with Cadillac. I knew him at Cadillac, and then while I was at Buick, we were doing the 76 Buick Regal Coupe. He asked me to add that to it, and so I did. It was literally the Cadillac taillight.
So you stole from yourself?
Stole from myself.
You went to Buick for a brief bit and then came back to Cadillac and worked on the Seville Elegante, the 78 Seville Elegante.
Yes.
And then you returned after the Seville. Another project you were working on was this 79 Eldorado, and you also worked on the 77 full-size Cadillacs and the downsizing of those right before that.
Well, when I came back to Cadillac from Buick, the 77 cars had already been started, the downsizing, and I had done a little of that in Buick. And then when I came back to Cadillac, then they had already started in Cadillac under Stan Weiland. Then I took over from there, and we worked on that for a while, but it changed directions a few times before it finally settled to ended up in production.
And then after that vehicle, the team was working on the 79 to 85 Eldorado, which we'll discuss today. So tell us a little bit about the philosophy there. I mean, you worked on the 71, which it was modified a bit, but lasted through 78 and was a tremendously huge 5,000 pound car. And now, trying to make it slimmer, trimmer, meaner? What was the thought process there?
Well, by the time we got into designing the '79 Eldorado, uh, fuel became an issue. Fuel economy was a big issue. And that Eldorado was about the biggest car in the lineup except for the limousine. So when we downsized the Eldorado, we were told that we were going to come off the same chassis and drivetrain as the Seville. The Seville would be off the same platform, so to speak. And that's where we started. I think it was 204 inches long, and I don't remember the exact wheelbase number, but the car was smaller, yet we still had to carry the same number of people, and we had to have trunk volume. And a lot of this was geared towards fuel economy and Cadillac's image, because Cadillac had big cars. We'd already started to downsize. Well, the Seville would have been the first car that we downsized. That was in 75 and a half, and I think it was sold as a 76.
Right. So that Seville was the start. That 76 Seville that came out in 75 and a half was the
Right.
start of the kind of the smaller Cadillacs.
Right. That's exactly true.
And then it followed up with the 77 full-size cars were downsized, and it left the Eldorado being a pretty big car, the biggest car in the showroom then.
Not only that, that stayed the biggest Cadillac except for the limousine until, through 1978.
Yeah. And so that's got to be an interesting conundrum, because you kind of got part of the lineup downsized, but you're waiting on this Eldorado that's still over 126 inches in wheelbase.
Right.
And, it's pretty large. So
5,000 pounds.
that's got that road hugging weight, right?
Well, one of the issues with that car, too, was when it got to be that size in that time period, there were people at Cadillac that were worried about the image of Cadillac. As it being a big, fuel-thirsty car, there were periods in and out where we were kind of out of sync with the energy crisis. And they didn't want to be caught in that same problem. So part of it was for image as well as aesthetics.
Got it. And so the 79 Eldorado, when it came out, the 78 was 126-inch wheelbase, which went to 114, so shaved about a foot off the wheelbase.
Right.
But the overall length went from 224 inches down to 204.
That's correct.
And it took, I think, 1,100 pounds out of the car.
Well, I was told by the engineers that for every inch of length of reduction, it was like equivalent to 50 pounds reduction. So,
20 inches out, 1,000 pounds-ish.
Yeah, design had a goal, engineering had a goal, and that's how it came about.
So it sounds like the background was you already have for the 79 Eldorado, part of the lineup's downsized. Cadillac's getting this image of gas guzzlers and wanting to get away from that and something more youthful, less gas guzzly, if you will, but still having the presence that an Eldorado would.
That's right.
And so then we have, this is my favorite part of the, I guess of the show here. Wayne's got some of his original artwork that he did. And to start, here with the 79 Eldorado, and I'll hold it up. The viewer doesn't need to see my face; they see it enough. But what was the team thinking here, Wayne, with some of these proposals?
Well, these are early sketches, and I was doing this, and had a design team. We were all sketching, and we all knew what the assignment was, is to downsize the Eldorado and to create a new shape for it. And these are early sketches. There were several other designers in the studio that were doing the same thing. I was in charge of the studio at the time, so I was kind of doing these in my office, and the designers were doing them in the studio. And then we'd put them up on the wall, and then we'd all look at them together, and we'd pick directions. But as we're designing the car, the design evolves. So these are just thought starters, and that's about what they are.
Mm. It's amazing how modern some of these look when you compare them to what came out, the final design field. Right? I mean, this one, remember, for the viewer, these sketches are done, they're dated 1976. I mean, think about that in the context of 1976. That's pretty amazing.
Well, that's what we were there for.
Well, I see you're also a nod to the finance person. You're saving money with the single exhaust down here too.
Yes, yes.
So that's, I'm sure, it was your principal consideration, right?
Exactly. That was my only consideration with that design, was to save money, because I knew the bean counters would be on my tail at any time.
And no vertical taillights here either.
Well, we looked at everything. I mean, it didn't end up that way, but you have to get that out of your system.
Now, what's interesting to me too, this one, the top sketch here, has, to me at least, a lot of some elements of the 92 Eldorado, even with the C-pillar area up here.
Well, the 67 through 70 had a D-line like that, and it had a V'd backlight, and because we made the car smaller, we couldn't use a V'd backlight. It'd take up too much of the trunk area.
I see.
But that's how you deal with proportions. The vertical part of the D-line here has to do with proportions. When I say proportions, it has to do with the relationship of the roof to the rear wheel location. And details like that really are part of the whole overall design. So when I say proportion to a car design is like one of my colleagues, I can't recall who said it, but he said proportions are to a design, location is to real estate.
You're experimenting with some really low hood lines here, how they terminate too.
Sure.
That's pretty radical for the time in the context
It would have been for Cadillac.
And here's another one. I mean, I see some visions of even the, I guess, late 80s, early 90s Coupe de Ville on the bottom here. Mm-hmm. But
except I think the Coupe de Ville, we had a quarter window that was part of the sail panel. Whereas this one still has a window that would probably go back into the sail panel or else come down into the quarter panel.
Now this one, I see some visions of the bustle back a little bit there.
A little bit, but that, that's many years after the first one that I tried anyway.
That's right, because you've been working on that bustle back design since the 60s, right?
I have, since the mid-60s.
So we saw those sketches, and then there's a couple others here. It looks like the team started with a two-door version of the Bustleback, or that was at least a consideration here.
It was. In fact, I'd shown that to Ed Kennard, who was the general manager of Cadillac at the time. I was trying to sell it as a 79 Eldorado. And Mitchell wanted to be a part of the meeting because he loved that design. And he said, I want to be there when you're showing it to Kennard. I said, okay. So I told him when the meeting was, and he came to the meeting. And Kennard rejected the design. So Mitchell looked at it and says, well, would you look at it as a Seville? And he says, yeah, I'll look at it as a Seville. I think he was just placating Mitchell because he wasn't too far from retirement. But we put another door cut on there and made a few modifications. Mitchell had me tighten up the design, a lot more creases on there than I originally had. But that's basically how that ended up as a Seville for 1980. Then we had to hustle to get a Eldorado for 79.
So this was kind of your first volley, and then it was rejected, and so you started looking at some of those other design themes.
Right. That's why we went through so many things.
And that's, by the way, for the viewer, I'll put a close-up of the picture. That's Wayne there, and that's Jack Humbert, former.
Jack Humbert was my immediate boss, and he was really quite a gentleman. I can't say enough good about Jack Humbert. Jack Humbert was the guy that was responsible for those beautiful Pontiacs, 65, 66, and I think even before that, before I really knew him. And he was just a peach of a man. He was great.
So that became the Seville, and then I think interestingly, as we talked about, these were on the same e-body platform as the Tornado and the Riviera, but probably to save money, the division wanted to share sheet metal between the Eldorado and the Seville, including the hood, right?
Well, I don't know if it was a division or if it was my idea, but anyway, yeah, we did share the hood between the Eldorado and the Seville, and I put a chrome cap on the leading edge of the hood.
Now you stole from yourself again here.
I did, because I brought that design from Buick when I was working on the Riviera, the 74 Riviera. That I changed the boat tail to an ordinary looking car. Made the change that the Buick division was after, but it really didn't help the sales. In fact, I thought it was not as good a looking car as the boat tail.
But you took the idea for the cap from this sketch almost to put on that Seville to disguise the fact that the hood was shared between the Eldo and the Seville.
Probably. Probably a good guess.
And we've got a few others. So we started with some of the more radical sketches, and now you can see some of Wayne's sketches that have more of a traditional Cadillac flair, let's say, for the front end.
Right. Something a little more stiff, a little more architectural looking. It does have a lot of the flavor of the 77 hood. Probably a little bit more vertical sheet metal above the grill. But what I started to do here kind of evolved into what we ended up with, and that was to take this surface here, which is a crown surface, and then intersecting it at this peak.
So we've got a different drawing here. This one, let's talk a little bit about the hood and what you're trying to do here, Wayne.
Okay, what I was trying to do with the hood here is get rid of that plateau hood that Cadillacs had for all those years, and simplify the design, because the car got smaller and I think it needed all those ins and outs. And what I'm looking at here with this hood surface is a crown surface that's intersected with this line here, which would have been a hood line from previous years. So you get a little bit of heritage in kind of a new form vocabulary. And that's what we ended up with on the hood of the Eldorado and the Seville. And on the Seville, we just put a chrome cap on it to camouflage it. But we took it off a year after that, saved a little bit of money, and people didn't even know the difference.
I like that when you say saved a little money.
I figured you would, and that's why I said it.
Here you've got the Eldorado spelled out in block lettering on the front, and a bit of a rake around to the sheet metal around the lights.
Right.
Too. And the grill. That's an interesting proposal. Now, you also, it looks like on these, you're designing in the license plate box too. So you're thinking about the requirements too.
Well, there are a number of states that still require front license plates, so you have to design for that.
So you were thinking about it as part of the design, because some cars, it's almost like they just put the license plate on as an afterthought and some ugly in some ugly location, but this is actually well integrated.
The thing you had to deal with too is that you had to have airflow into the radiator and the air conditioner condenser. So you had to have enough air to keep the engine cool, but not too much air that you would create an aerodynamic issue. We still had to have a front license plate in a number of states, so we had to design for it. And you don't want a Cadillac to look like it's got an add-on and have the license plate all bent up when it goes through a car wash. So that's another good reason to design a box that looks like it's got a purpose.
Now here's a thick egg crate texture. This is kind of like the 74 Cadillac front end, and you've got the parking lights from
Yeah,
the 68.
73. Yeah.
73, yeah.
Hmm.
And you've got the parking lights from the kind of
Yeah.
the 68 Eldorado.
Yeah. Yeah. Kind of. Well, it's a crease line that kind of added the front fender on. That was a replacement for the 67 Eldorado because of the lining up of that die-cast part.
Hmm.
That was a 73 Eldorado that had a grill like that. That was very bold. It's something that you can see from a distance and you know what it is.
Oh, so that was the intent, was that thick?
That was the intent.
Oh, the thick texture, so you know
Right.
what it is. And
These are just exercises, different textures.
And then one last one here. This one's got the vertical bar texture.
We were looking at, or I was looking at, okay, the vertical bars here would have been like if it was thermostatically controlled, but not really. The bars would be facing inward, and from one side you'd see a lot of bright work. From the other side, you'd see into the opposite side of the grill. So Rolls-Royce does something like that, and other cars have done it. I think one of the Lincolns did it. They used to do things like that with the thermostatically controlled vanes in front of the radiators.
Oh, to get more or less airflow.
Yeah, to close off the radiator to warm the engine up earlier in the wintertime and then open it up.
Well, that didn't make it through to production, but the car ended up being tremendously successful. The previous Eldorado sold 45 to 50,000 units a year in its latter years, which were some of its best years. But this car, I was looking at the sales figures in 84 and 85 at the end of the run, it's selling 75, 80,000 units. Yeah. And then let's talk a little bit about the Biarritz trim and what you did there and what the thought was.
Yeah, it was a stainless steel cap, but I think that was somebody at Fisher Body that had mentioned it. And I remember that the Brougham, the 57, 58 Cadillac Brougham had a stainless steel top. But in this case, it's a stainless steel stamping that goes on top of the regular steel roof.
So somebody made the suggestion, and
yeah, and then I tried it and it looked great. So that made a really big change to the car. It made it look more upscale, made it look more expensive. And then we just put a molding across the top and then a molding along the front fender and the belt. And some more ornamentations and some little interior changes. And it was a Biarritz option. And I think at one point it was somewhere north of 30% of their volume. So it was a big seller and it was a high profit item.
Yeah, it was basically the stainless steel cap, some different seats, some more badging.
Right.
It had the button tufted seats on the interior. Yes. And then there was another, so there was the Biarritz, then there was also the touring coupe that came out. What was the story with that?
Okay, the touring coupe came about from a trip that I had taken to California to give me an idea as to what was going on in the field. And so they set up a schedule or a visit through a number of dealerships in the Bay Area and then also in Southern California. And I think a couple of places in LA and then maybe a little south of Los Angeles. And when I was at Penske's dealership in California, they had one there, and there was a young, very impressive dealer there that was, or salesperson that was telling me about the car, because I had asked him, I saw it, and I was asking him about it, and he was telling me that they put that package together and they thought that there'd be a market for it, and they were having success with it. So I had mentioned it when I got back, and then we put a car together, and we actually we really copied what he was doing. I copied what he was doing. I shouldn't say we. I directed it.
There it is there
Yes.
with the black wall tires.
Yes,
And
it was black wall tires, aluminum wheels, and it was kind of getting away from the image of what Cadillac had been for so many years, with the white walls and all the decorations.
it lost the stand-up hood ornament too, and had like this little cloisonne
Right.
emblem on
Yeah.
the top,
Right.
just to make it more sporty.
Yes.
Interesting. I always thought that was one of my favorites of
Mhm.
this particular design. And then later on, it got a couple colors. One was the black, of course, sable black, and then
Yeah.
this one, which is
I think the one that I saw at the dealer was a dark colored. I don't recall whether it was black or whether it was.
Sonoran Saddle Fire Mist or something.
No, it wasn't. It wasn't.
Oh, Penske had one in maroon, I think I want to say.
It might have been.
Yeah, when
I
they
can't
did it.
be for sure, but
So I thought that was a really neat. Unfortunately, the car by that point was endowed with a less than sporting engine under hood.
it still had that HT 4100 engine. I think by then it had maybe 140 horse or 160 horse.
I think you're being generous. I think it was 135.
I know I've got an 84 Seville with that engine, and it can hardly get out of its own way.
So
Driving around town is great, but if I get on the freeway and I have to pass somebody, I have to make sure I've got enough distance to make the change.
But that's part of the whole, if you will, kind of mystique of driving the Cadillac. It doesn't really, the party starts when you arrive. So you might as well just take your time, right? Was that the consideration for putting that engine in there?
Well, if I was that arrogant, I'd probably say the same thing you're suggesting, but
that wasn't the intent, I guess, is what you're saying.
No,
okay.
no.
But the 79 to 85 Eldorado certainly a success. Really, I think toward the end, actually almost doubling the sales volumes of the previous generation. Was there any regrets or things you wanted on the car that you didn't get, or did it come out kind of as intended?
I think it came out pretty much like, I shouldn't say it's just me. I mean, I have a team, that helped me do this, but I think our team did a pretty good job on that car. And, if I look back at the 67 through 70 Eldorado, the first front drive cars for Cadillac, a lot of designers and a lot of people, look at those cars as probably being some of the best looking Cadillacs that there ever was. And, or amongst the best looking Cadillacs, sure, I should say. But okay, that car sold between 30 and I think the best year was around 40 some thousand a year for the best year.
Mm-hmm.
And those cars had unique bodies. They shared hardly anything with Oldsmobile or Buick, except the windshields and the side glass planes and the cowl. When we got into the 71 Eldorado, Tornado, and Riviera, we all shared, we started out being unique with a narrower car. And I think at one time we were looking at coming off of the Grand Prix. And then there was a study where maybe there wasn't enough capacity in the plant to build the other three cars. So we ended up, or evolved into coming off of the
B body, right?
B body, which shared the cowl, I think, even with a C body. So you had the same windshield, you had the same cowl, which forced the width of the car. And so that kind of changed the exterior design. We shared a roof panel with Tornado. Riviera had its own roof panel. We shared probably a frame, and I don't know what else, we call it black iron, things that you don't see.
Like door inners or something?
Under panel, yeah, door inners. But there was a lot more shared with the 71 through 78 Eldorado. And we increased the sales volume almost every year with that car through, I think, 78. You'd have to go back and take a look. I mean, not to the extent that the 79 through 85, but we still did pretty well having to deal with all these shared parts.
To your point, I think the 78 Eldorado sold 48,000 units. Didn't have the convertible anymore either.
No.
It was just the coupe.
Right.
And the 71 with the convertible, I think, sold 28,000 units.
Yeah.
So it kind of went up and up and up
right.
as the time went on.
And now with this third iteration of the front drive, that did even better.
Well, a hugely successful car. Thanks for, I think the sketches are super interesting, and thanks for taking us through that, Wayne.
You're very welcome.
One of your home runs there, let's say.
Thank you.
Well, thanks everybody for watching. Take care.